Hello, my name is John Jones, and I am a freelance writer. To take it to its most basic level, a freelancer is somebody who's not on staff at any magazine or company. I basically work for myself. I'm a contractor. What that means from an editorial standpoint is that I come up with story ideas on my own that I think will appeal to the readers of various websites and publications, and then I pitch those ideas to editors. It's a lot like the way public relations professionals pitch story ideas to editors, except that mine tend to be more all encompassing as opposed to focusing on one client or product. As more editorial outlets are challenged by smaller budgets and smaller staffs, freelancers are becoming much more common and in demand. Currently, I write for websites that focus on men's style and grooming, especially The Manual and Ask Men. I also occasionally write for a trade publication called MR Magazine. I have also dabbled in some content creation for brands, including writing about product for e-commerce sites and writing Wikipedia pages. My background is primarily in fashion marketing. I knew that I wanted to work in the fashion industry from a young age, but I wasn't sure where or what I wanted to do. So I attended Mercyhurst College in Erie, Pennsylvania, before transferring to the Fashion Institute of Technology, where I got my degree in marketing communications. I started working at a public relations firm, working on luxury brands like St. DuPont, which makes lighters and writing instruments, things like that, Enfield Cashmere, which is a British apparel company, and Crabtree and Evelyn, which is a bath and body care company. As my career developed, I worked both in-house for brands as a communications director, as well as an account executive for several agencies. At one point, I began to develop a kind of specialty in menswear. While I enjoyed the creative aspects of marketing, all the brainstorming and putting together materials for press kits, that sort of thing, the pitching part of it, the just being on the phone constantly pitching editors all day, or eventually emailing them, just was not something that appealed to me at all. And I don't know, I would kind of get sort of bogged down in all of that. So I started taking some writing classes at Media Bistro with the idea that I would start freelancing a little bit while I was working in public relations, and then hopefully build a career that way. However, just in the process of doing all that, I ended up having an opportunity to work at MR Magazine. This is the trade publication I mentioned earlier. I was its fashion director for about 8 years. While I was there, part of my job was writing feature stories about what was happening in the menswear industry. So it was everything from writing about tailored clothing to dress shirts and sportswear, outerwear, accessories, really anything that had to do with menswear, with a focus on the retailers and the personalities that were behind the business. While there, I also had the pleasure of creating the magazine's fashion pages. So that meant I was producing all the photo shoots, doing the styling, casting models, hiring photographers, and all that sort of thing. So I really enjoyed that creative process, that part of it. Like I said, I did it for 8 years. I absolutely loved the job. The problem was that it was a pretty small company, so there wasn't a lot of room for advancement. And since I was already at that point in my 40s, I was like, there wasn't really an opportunity for me to like move to a consumer publication, like go to GQ or Esquire or something like that, because that would, you need somebody like much younger to really kind of start at the bottom of the ladder there. And then I just was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And so at that point, the online revolution was happening, and the demise of print publications was really starting to take hold. So I sort of like went for my safety, and I jumped back into working in marketing for about 5 years. I worked at a fun, like kind of creative marketing firm for about like 4 years, which was it was a small company, so it was very much like a startup and very stressful. I jumped back in house for a company for about a year or so that just was a company that was in California, and then I ended up working at a PR firm that was just. Oof, it was just painful. I will give you one piece of advice. Check Glassdoor or do your homework about any job you potentially take, and make sure you have a really good understanding of what a company is like before you go there. I ended up just literally quitting one day and just being like, yeah, I can't work here anymore. So I just gave my notice. I finished out 2 weeks. Which was very uncomfortable, and then decided to like take the summer off and kind of figure out what I wanted to do with my life next. So in the fall of that year, I went back to my editor at MR and I asked her if I could write a couple of pieces for the magazine. And she told me, I don't really have a freelance budget. I was like, that's really okay. I'm not really looking to do this for money right now. I just need something to kind of keep myself busy and get my toe back in the water and kind of figure out what's going on with my career right now. And it's kind of, so I wanted to reconnect with people. And so she gave me a couple of story assignments. And the minute I started working on them, from the very first interview, I knew what I needed to do. I was like, this is like really pushing my buttons again. And I know that I really miss writing and being an editor. So I took the couple of pieces that I'd written for her and tried to spin them to a couple of other places as more consumer-oriented pieces. And so the first place that I went to was the Manual, because I knew the man who had started that company, who was like the editor-in-chief. And he at first was kind of resistant to it. And he was like, we kind of have all the freelance writers we need right now. It's really difficult to get people up to speed and all that. And then I kind of kept up with him. I didn't badger him, but I just sort of kept up with him a little bit. And then finally at one point he said, you know what, actually, that story idea you had in mind, it would be okay if you did it this way. And so he introduced me to the managing editor, and they got me all set up about like how to work with them and how to use WordPress and all that kind of thing. And then I pitched them a couple of stories and started out like I ended up doing on a regular basis about 2 or 3 stories a month for them. And now I'm up to like 8 or 12 stories a month for them. So it's worked out pretty well. A few months after I started working for them, I was told that the freelancer who had been covering grooming for the site left for a full-time gig at a competing site. And my editor suggested that I pitch some men's grooming topics. And I said, sure. But I don't know anything about grooming. So I decided that old saying about you fake it till you make it. And I did that for a while. And now probably half the material I create for the Manual is about grooming. It's really given me a whole different skill set to draw on. And I think the thing that's great about being a freelancer, one of the things, is that you can find an area of interest and figure out a way to tie that back, and you pitch that story to somebody and they say sure, and it gives you a chance to go back and just like learn about something that you think is cool. So like if I wanted to learn about retinol, for instance, I pitched that as a story at one point, and next thing I know I'm writing a story about retinol. So it's kind of fun to be able to like chase down your own kind of almost selfish or personal interest to do that. Oddly enough, within a few days after leaving the Manual, that same grooming editor emailed me to see if I had signed any kind of a non-compete, which I hadn't. So he asked if I could write for him as well. He was at a website called Ask Men. So I now write for Ask Men on a pretty regular basis as well. Not as much as the Manual, but we're getting there. I will caution you, the way that I did it is not the way to break into freelance. I was extremely lucky in that I had inherited some money, so I could afford to support myself for a while. My husband owns our home and has great health insurance, so my expenses are relatively minimal. I've learned that I can live without shopping, and that toting along a sandwich I made myself sometimes tastes better and is a lot cheaper than buying one in Midtown Manhattan. Also, because of the beats I cover, I'm often getting gifted plenty of clothes and accessories and grooming products, so I don't really have to go buy very much as far as that kind of thing goes. It's helpful. What's also great is that I get to work all over the place. If you check out my Instagram, you'll see I often post with what I call today's office. So while I'm often working here at my kitchen table, sometimes I'm working from the Rose Reading Room at the New York Public Library. Sometimes it's a park, sometimes a coffee shop or a restaurant, or sometimes it's someplace exotic because I'm off on a press trip somewhere. Since starting to freelance, I've been on trips to Banff in Canada, Lisbon, Portugal, New Orleans not too long ago, and I'm going to be going to Jackson Hole, Wyoming in a couple of weeks as well for a trip. So there's some fun opportunities. My day-to-day kind of routine follows a sort of a circular path. I start really by pitching editors with various topics each month. So like about this time of the month, middle of the month is when some of my editors start looking for story ideas, and then anywhere between now and like the end of the month they'll come to me, and so I'll send a pitch of like a list of like 5 or 10 ideas, and they'll kind of choose from those. Sometimes they'll get back to me like, hey, yes, I like this idea, let's go with it. Sometimes it's, hey, I kind of like this idea, but I'd rather it go this direction, so they modify it a little bit. And then sometimes it's like, we don't really like any of those, so, but I do have these other 2 or 3 stories that I need to have up on the site. Can you handle those? So sometimes it's as simple as that. And of course, sometimes there's nothing. Once I have those assignments and I start researching the stories, I do end up going on a lot of appointments and that kind of thing. Sometimes too many, and in the course of a month. I do like to meet people in person where possible, so I can really get a sense of the personality behind a brand. If that's not possible, then a phone call is always great as well, because then at least you have some connection with the person. Those appointments are usually the start of like a deep dive research into any given topic, and so once I've done that, I will kind of dig in and start doing research online and trying to find out other things. Sometimes I'll meet with somebody just because they happen to be in town or because some new product is being released. Even if it's not for a specific story, it gives me fodder for pitching later, even if it's not necessarily what I'm working on right now. Sometimes research is simple as spending an afternoon shopping for the best pair of jeans or shoes for a roundtable story, but sometimes it gets a little bit more as intense. I recently wrote a story about fabrics and fibers and about how those were crossing over from the active and outdoor markets into tailored clothing and more traditional sportswear. That required a bit more digging and speaking to people at places like DuPont Sorona. They make a special stretch fiber, and so it was like things like really getting into the more nuts and bolts piece of it. Eventually, once it's all done, I take those interviews and that research and turn it into a story. Once the story is written and submitted, then it's time to start all over again and really go back to the pitching process and really get all that done. I tend to get ideas from all over the place. Sometimes it's from as simple as going to a trade show, looking at social media and see what's going on, even looking at other magazines and websites and seeing what kind of trends they're covering at any given moment. Especially though, a lot of what I get is just from watching what guys are wearing and what they're doing. I'll be out on the streets and just kind of looking at people and noticing all of a sudden, hey, like guys are really wearing their pants a little shorter, or they're wearing a particular Patagonia vest or something like that. So you kind of see things like that coming together. I also, of course, get great ideas from publicists who pitch me things, and the longer that I write, the more publicists have added me to their list. So I'm getting a lot more email pitches about things that are out there in the market and things that are trending in product categories. Different writers, different editors all have their preferences about how they prefer to be pitched. I think I'm pretty typical in that I prefer a really simple email pitch with only the basics. It doesn't have to be eloquently written, just clear and concise. Don't misspell things, because that kind of stuff can kind of make me be suspicious of your seriousness. Then bullet points are fine. And then I like for details to be included in like an attached press release that really gets into the nuts and bolts of what's going on. It's best to include as much as possible in that release, but I also do like a little bit of allowance for discovery, meaning if I have an opportunity to connect with personalities and find out if they're genuine, to see how a product or service might specifically connect with my target reader, that's always kind of a helpful next step. It's a kind of a way to allow me to kind of put my own personal spin on the story. I think the biggest requirement for editors is that our beats. I cover men's style and grooming. Don't pitch me women's evening gowns. Don't pitch me electronics, even though that's a common interest to men, unless of course somehow the electronics have like a fashion angle. I write for short lead for websites, meaning I'm usually writing about something that's published on the site within a day or two after I've turned it in, a week at the most. So there's no reason to start pitching me holiday gift giving ideas in August. On the other hand, if I were writing for a print publication, it's probably time to start pitching those products, because that way I'm working on something that's going to be like months ahead of time. Don't forget that when I'm writing for something like MR Magazine, which again is a trade publication, I'm writing about topics that are 6 months to a year out, that are often involving products that haven't even been made up into samples yet. So I'll need interviews with designers and sketches and pictures of swatches and things like that to be able to tackle that kind of story. Don't be afraid to take risks. Unlike magazines where editors and their teams have very specific markets that they cover, as a freelancer, I'm always looking for new opportunities. So something that seems off for what I write for the manual might be appropriate for some other target that I'm trying to reach. So I guess what I'm saying is that as a freelancer, I have a little bit more flexibility than maybe some writers do. So don't be afraid to take a chance once you've gotten to know me a little bit better. To summarize, remember that a freelancer can be a great ally. Because he or she doesn't work for any one website or publication, but for many, that means that a good pitch can end up in multiple places. Personally, I have a background in marketing and public relations, so as an editor, I can relate to your objectives. But that also means that I'm going to hold you to a higher standard. Your pitches have better be damn good. Because I have to develop my own pitches, I can take your client or product and combine it with others to make a more exciting story too. Be specific in your pitch, but not too specific. Once you know what you're doing and have established a relationship with a freelancer, you can take your chances and work with them on letting them kind of take the story and run with it. If there's one thing that I would really, really like you to take away from this, it's that relationships are everything. I built my career by connecting with people and keeping in touch with people over time. Tom Hanley and I, for instance, met at a fashion show when I recognized that the card on his seat called out that he worked at Evans Communications, which was the first public relations firm that I worked for. So we've been in touch ever since then. I've gotten jobs by relying on my network, and now as a freelancer, rely on that same network to keep me really informed and connected, and not only to know what's going on in the business and look for story opportunities, but then also to look for potential employment opportunities. Feel free to email me with any questions. My email address is me@johnrusselljones.com. You can also follow me on social media. I'm John Russell Jones on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, just about everything there is. That's John Russell Jones. It's JohnRussellJones. So just about anywhere. All right. Thanks for your time.